So morality has a pretty basic definition. It basically just means what is right and wrong. Morality is about what you ought to do or ought not do, or what you should or should not do. And I'd like to talk about morality this morning from a biblical perspective. And the biblical perspective on morality is very important. It's a perspective that the world needs today, whether it realizes it or not. I'd like to share a quote that sort of emphasizes the importance of morality and the need that the world has for it. So this is from a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. And he didn't believe in God. And he believed that all people would come to disregard God and to throw away that old idea. But he wasn't as enthusiastic about that future as a lot of people who believed that the world was going to quit believing in God. These are questions that he asked through a character in one of his books called The Madman, when he considered a world in which he and others no longer believed in God. He said, "What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing?" So it's kind of colorful language, but that's really the way he felt. And I've mentioned him before because just a fascinating man. Because when he took the conclusions that he reached about there not being a God all the way to the end, it drove him crazy, and he ended up just being institutionalized. But it was because he started asking some of these kinds of questions. He considered a world in which there was no God, in which no one considered the Bible to be authoritative, and he started ending up with questions like, is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? That is, if there's no one who has the ultimate authority to tell us what to do, then how are we going to decide what is right and wrong? Who gets to make the rules? Is it just the person with the most power, the most violent individual? Is it just whoever happens to be in charge who gets to decide what is right and wrong? Or is there an objective standard? The world needs an objective standard for right and wrong, whether they realize it or not. If we don't have that, we're straying through an infinite nothing, as he says. There's no up or down. Anyone's opinion is as good as anyone else's opinion, if there's no authority that you can look back to. I like the question posed in Matthew 22, 34 through 36, when we start to think about the biblical answer to those questions and the biblical view of morality and right and wrong and what you should and should not do. It says, "But when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered themselves together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, 'Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?'" And there were often these sort of public debates or standoffs where they would try to humiliate Jesus by finding a question that he couldn't answer or tricking him with special questions. But I really appreciate those situations because inasmuch as they were trying to trick or embarrass Jesus, what they ended up doing is coming up with some really good questions. And we benefit from seeing Jesus' answers to some of the best questions they could possibly come up with because he always had an answer for them right away. The question was, what is the great commandment in the law? In other words, what is the basis of this whole law that we have, all of this morality? What's at the heart of it? What is the most important thing? Basically asking Jesus to give us the essence and the core of Christian morality. Now, we're going to look at how Jesus answered it, and you may already know, and there's a lot to think about and discuss in regards to his answer. But think some more about what the world would give as an answer to that question. What is the great commandment in the law? Maybe it is to follow your heart. What is it that the world believes in at the core of the world's morality? Of course, the Bible rejects that idea. It says the heart is more deceitful than all else and is desperately sick. Who can understand it? The Bible never tells us just to follow our own hearts or just to trust in ourselves and in our feelings and our intuitions. There's a higher law than that for us. Maybe it is to trust your own intelligence. There was a time still ongoing for many in the world in which it was believed that technology was just going to fix everything. Technology has done a lot for us, but it hasn't fixed some of our heart problems, some of the things that we really need to go to the Bible for our answers to. 1 Corinthians 3:8-9 says, "Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you thinks that he is wise in this age, he must become foolish, so that he may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness before God." The wisdom of this world cannot serve as the foundation for our morality. It will always come up short. Maybe the greatest commandment in the law for the world today is just do whatever you want and let everyone else do whatever they want, as long as you don't hurt anybody. Of course, it's a little difficult to determine what you mean by hurting somebody. But I share this quote. I'm sorry, this man, David Bentley Hart, he really likes to use big words. I found a quote with not a lot of big words, but I think he has a very good insight into our society today in the way he describes it. So he's describing our world, and he says, freedom for us today is something transcendent even of reason. That means you don't have to give reasons for why you want to do this thing. Freedom is the ultimate thing. He says, we no longer really feel that we must justify our liberties by recourse to some prior standard of responsible rationality. Freedom, conceived as the perfect, unconstrained spontaneity of individual will, is its own justification, its own highest standard, its own unquestionable truth. I believe that's a very good description of the world around us and the way people today view morality, that freedom is its own highest standard, its own unquestionable truth, that above and beyond anything else, what you don't want to do is take away someone's freedom or take away your own freedom by imposing rules on yourself that you don't have to have imposed on you. You should be able to follow your heart or your intellect or whatever you want, wherever it leads, with no justification. But of course, that's not what Jesus answered. He said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets." This is why I love the fact that people tried to come up with the hardest question they could and ask Jesus, because then he just fired right back with a perfect response that could teach us so much about that great question that was asked. They asked, what's the great commandment? Maybe thinking, which one is most important? And what he answers them is essentially, let me give you the two greatest commandments, and let me show you that everything else rests upon them, and they're the foundation of Christian morality. It's amazing how he can condense so much when you think about what someone should and should not do into such a short answer. I don't think many of the philosophers of ethics today would be able to answer the question quite that easily when asked what the basis of morality was. Maybe that's why in places like Matthew 7:28 and 29, we read, "The crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes." You could ask Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he could tell you right away in a few words the two greatest commandments and the fact that they're the foundation of all the others. That is a very authoritative and impressive answer, and it contains a lot that we can think about in our time this morning. Now, the first thing that stands out to me that I like to note about Jesus' answer and thinking about Christian morality is the fact that he talks about love. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That seems a little unusual because we don't really have man-made laws commanding you to love someone. The police aren't going to come beating on your door saying, we heard that you didn't love your next door neighbor. We heard that you don't love this person. Maybe because there's no way for us to accurately judge, who loves who. But isn't it interesting? They ask for a command, and the command is to love. It's not to do a certain particular thing. It's to love God and love your fellow neighbor. I believe that's important and very powerful because it goes right to the heart of the issue. The heart of the issue, literally our heart, and whether we have love for God and for our neighbor will determine all the other things that spring out of it. Luke 6:45 says, "The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth what is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth what is evil. For his mouth speaks from that which fills his heart." Think about in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus tried to go beyond the written law as they understood it, and to say not only should you not murder, but you should not be angry without cause or be hateful towards your brother. To say not only should you not commit adultery, but you should not have lust in your heart. And so he tried to get them to look at the heart of the matter, to question whether they were really loving God and loving their neighbor, and not just whether they were doing this action or that action. I think that's the power of Christian morality, because it's a power that no government has. As we said, the government's not going to say, you're in trouble because you don't love so-and-so. Government laws, man-made laws that we impose on each other are always sort of surface level, getting you in trouble for this action or for not doing that action. But God has the power to go right to our hearts, to change us in a more fundamental way. That's why I believe you can't legislate morality. Ultimately, you've got to change hearts. We want our legislation to reflect morality, of course, but if we really want to bring about change in people's lives, it starts in the heart. Matthew 7:24-27 says, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house. And yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." The reason why I mention this is because it shows the balanced and realistic view that Christianity gives to our actions as well as to our heart. On one hand, you can focus only on the actions and try to reform them again and again without changing the heart and fail. But then on the other hand, when you say, well, the heart is what matters, well, the world likes the sound of that at first because it sounds like you're saying the actions don't matter, right? Well, as long as your heart is in the right place, you can do whatever you want. And that's not the teaching of Christianity either. We see in this passage, among many, that Jesus indicates to us that our actions have consequences, and that immoral actions will have severe negative consequences. I think that's part of the power of Christian morality. It emphasizes the extreme importance of our actions, but it attributes them to coming from the heart and remembers that the heart has to be changed first and then the actions will follow. Which is why verses like Romans 12:2 say, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." It is necessary for man-made governments to do things that protect us. If someone is dangerous, maybe they have to be put behind bars, or maybe we have to do what we can to instill a fear in people that would prevent them from doing wrong. But wouldn't it be beautiful if we could also have more renewing of minds? Isn't that the power that comes from Christian morality that is the ultimate goal? And don't we want that in our own lives? To realize that it's not just about focusing on stopping doing the wrong things and starting to do good things. That it starts in the heart. So there's a lot of love mentioned in the Great Commandments. He says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. It's important that the first commandment is to love God first and foremost in everything. By telling us to love, Christian morality goes to the core of our person and not just the surface level of our actions. By telling us to love God, it appeals to an objective standard, an eternal standard that we don't get to decide on our own. Isaiah 47:8 says, "The grass withers, the flower fades when the breath of the Lord blows upon it. Surely the people are grass. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God stands forever." There is a morality. It is revealed in God's word. It flows from God himself, and it stands forever. Though people come and go, though cultures and nations come and go, and they have different opinions and different practices, they have their own idea of what's right and what's wrong. By telling us to love God, we're being told to adhere to an eternal standard. Which is why Paul can write to Timothy and say, "I write so that you will know how one ought to conduct himself in the household of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and support of the truth." It's something steady and firm that lasts, that doesn't shift or it isn't blown about by cultural winds. It is an eternal standard. And I brought something that I would like to read to you in conjunction with this picture. This is one picture from some part of the Wexner Art Center. So this is something that was pointed out to me by a man named Ravi Zacharias. He's a lecturer on morality and ethics and things like that. He said, "I remember lecturing at Ohio State University, one of the largest universities in this country. I was minutes away from beginning my lecture, and my host was driving me past a new building called the Wexner Center for the Performing Arts. He said, 'This is America's first postmodern building.' I was startled for a moment, and I said, 'What is a postmodern building?' He said, 'Well, the architect said that he designed the building with no design in mind.' And when the architect was asked why, he said, 'If life itself is capricious, why should our buildings have any design and any meaning?' So he has pillars that have no purpose. He has stairways that go nowhere. He has a senseless building, and somebody has paid for it.' I said, so his argument was that if life has no purpose and design, why should the building have any design? He said, that is correct. I said, did he do the same with the foundation? All of a sudden, there was silence. You see, you and I can fool with the infrastructure as much as we would like, but we dare not fool with the foundation because it will call our bluff in a hurry. Christian morality is objective. It doesn't change. It lasts forever. It isn't just pointless and meaningless, and anyone's idea is as good as anyone else. And because of that, it gives us a solid foundation to build upon. And the ironic thing is, as much as the world around us wants to act like morality is just anything that anybody comes up with, and you just need to let everyone be free to do whatever they want, that if that really becomes the foundation of society, it will fall apart. We play around a little bit with the infrastructure, pretending to be gods, but the truth is God's given us a foundation of morality that is solid, that must last. And I believe this applies to us as individuals, not just so that we can, laugh at the silliness of the world that wants to make everything relative, but to help us realize as well, as we focused a little bit lately, that God gets to tell us what to do, and we don't get to mess around with our understanding of the Bible and change it to what we like, that He sets the standard, and we align ourselves to it in every case. And the second part then of Jesus' answer, first He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. That is, you shall give your whole self, not just the surface level of your actions, and you shall give it to this objective standard which is unchanging, which you submit yourself to. And now He turns to our interactions with our fellow human beings. And He says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. How many problems in this world could have been avoided if we would just do that? Matthew 7:12 says, in everything therefore treat people the same way you want them to treat you. For this is the law and the prophets. And it's come to be known as the Golden Rule, and it's sort of celebrated throughout history all over the world as this simple but powerful means of judging what is right and wrong. But Christianity doesn't just tell us to love our neighbors as ourselves. It gives us a very good reason for doing so. It teaches us that human life is sacred because we're made in God's image. Genesis 1:27 says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And in Genesis 9:6, we read, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. And as God establishes the fact in Genesis 1, we're made in his image. And already by chapter 9, he is giving that rationale to explain why murder is wrong, essentially. Because the image of God is on man, and it is fundamentally immoral to violate that by killing another person or by harming them. I think this should inform our understanding of abortion, especially, that if the image of God is on every individual, we should not want to destroy that image. And here's an interesting passage that talks about images being on things and who they belong to. They questioned him, saying, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach correctly, and you're not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But he detected their trickery and said to them, Show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have? They said, Caesar's. And he said to them, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. There's a sense in which our governments, because they mint our money and put their stamp on it, have a certain claim on that currency. In the same way, because God has created us and put his image on us, he has a claim on each individual, and he will hold us responsible if we do not treat his creations with his image on them in a way that he would like. I just want to share one final passage with you for us to think about, because both of the great commandments are to love, and 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7 gives us this famous and powerful definition of love. It says, love is patient, love is kind and is not jealous, love does not brag and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, is not provoked, does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So just to be especially clear about what this passage says, if we are being impatient about something, maybe that isn't love. If we're being unkind, it isn't love. If we are being jealous or bragging or being arrogant, it is not love. If we're acting unbecomingly, if we're seeking our own, or being provoked and taking wrongs into account and rejoicing in that unrighteousness, it isn't love. If we are not rejoicing in the truth, it isn't love. And if we're not bearing and believing and hoping and enduring all things on behalf of another, it isn't love. It seems to be what the passage is saying. And I encourage us to take it to heart. You know, the words of the Bible are powerful, and in the times in our lives when we need strength or direction, we can come to it. And this is one of those passages that I like to come to when I'm trying to figure out what to do and how to feel about a situation. That's just a very general overview of morality in the Bible. I hope that we are impressed with the need that the world has for a basis for its morality, and the trouble that it's already getting into and will continue to get into when the foundation is swept out from underneath our morality. And I hope that as individuals that will inspire us to want to conform our whole selves and the core of our beings to a standard that is above and beyond us, and that incorporates the idea of the sacred, that God's image on every single person is sacred, and that we ought to treat them the way that we want to be treated. And I want to just extend the invitation with that to be baptized into Christ for the remission of sins, or to confess sins if it's appropriate for you to do so in a public manner, or to ask for prayers for any reason, or to ask for any help that we can give as we stand and sing together.